Hello and welcome to NewsClick. Ever since the signing of the Defense Framework Agreement between India and the US, there has been talk about India signing what the US calls the three foundational agreements, which the US usually signs with all its military allies. These agreements serve to facilitate transfer of strategic technologies, sharing of each other's facilities, promoting interoperability, and so on. However, despite the burgeoning purchase of US military hardware by India, India has been hesitant about signing these now for over a decade. But the present government seems to have shed these inhibitions and looks as if it is getting ready to sign at least the first of the three foundational agreements, that is the Logistical Services Agreement, possibly during the visit to India of the US Defense Secretary Ashton Carter sometime in April. To discuss this and its implications, we have with us Dr. Atul Bhardwaj, now with the Institute of Chinese Studies in Delhi. Welcome.
Thank you, sir.
First, explain to our viewers, what does the Logistical Services Agreement mean? What does it imply in terms of the relationship between the militaries?
Logistical LSA, as they call it, is primarily an agreement where the two countries can establish primarily their military bases on each other's land and can avail of certain logistic facilities while transiting through those bases. Now, in case of India, let us take first, the possibility of India going and establishing a military base in America is ruled out. So, even if the agreement says that it is on reciprocal basis, for India it does not have a meaning. That is one part of it. But then, to justify the reciprocal clause in the agreement, what they say is that India would now be able to refuel and use for rest and recuperation the American facilities in Southeast Asia, say in Philippines for that matter, and other bases in Southeast Asia. As far as America is concerned, it has been a long cherished dream of America, for a long time now, to come and establish a kind of a military base in India, especially with now their focus on, with American pivot to Asia. It has become almost imperative for them to have a base in India and to have India as a solid, credible ally with them. Now, when they have a military base here, what exactly it means is that they are going to have their troops here, they are going to have their military hardware, they are going to have their communication facilities installed in a particular delineated area on Indian land. And the facilities that they would seek from India, the logistic facilities that is fuel, food, and other logistic facilities, would be available to them at the same price at which it is available to the Indian military.
Just for clarification, are these permanent bases, or does the agreement talk about the US sharing Indian facilities?
When you talk in terms, in this particular case, they are going to establish a base. As I explained, in India's case, India may not be in a position to establish a base, but Americans would definitely, once their whole agreement is, there is a legal stamp on the agreement, then they are able to establish their base, move in and out quite freely. Their rotational forces can keep coming and going, but they would have one dedicated place available to them. And this particular space will then be fully guarded by the Americans, with very little Indian say in the area that they control or the space that they control. So, these are going to have long-term implications.
Yeah, in fact, I was going to come to that. Strategically, what are the implications of this, particularly in the context of, as I said, the previous government, despite having this offer on the table from the US since 2004, I think was when the US mooted it first, was hesitant about entering into it precisely because of sensitivities about Indian sovereignty or about what the implications would be of India virtually entering into a formal kind of military alliance with the US. But this government seems to be ready to go ahead.
This government, basically, as you said, this entire idea was mooted in 2004 when Indo-US Defense Policy Group started, debating the issue. India gradually was getting into the agreement even during the Congress government. There was some hesitation, but then things were moving in the direction. Now probably we have reached a stage where America thinks that, and India also, the present government thinks that we are now in a position to sign this and go ahead with it. Without actually debating the whole issue in public, without getting the inputs for and against it from the public, the government probably wants to go ahead with it in a very, clandestine and surreptitious manner. If you actually see what this agreement is having an impact upon, it is having an impact on your sovereignty first of all. And when we talk in terms of sovereignty, the basic issue is that if you invite a foreign power to come and establish their military wherewithal on your land, you are primarily saying that my monopoly over organized violence as a state is now, I am sharing that monopoly with somebody else. You are basically hinting that, where we have reached a stage where we are probably not fully capable of guarding our own territories. The second biggest impact of this agreement is going to be on strategic autonomy itself. Your decision to go to war or your decision to be in peace is not solely going to be your own now. With the foreign military power and one of the largest military powers, it's not something that which is you're offering a logistic courtesies to some small military power or a medium military power which is equal to you. This military power is not equal to you. It is far, far ahead of you.
I believe there is a clause in the LSA to the effect that if there is a third party conflict involved, if say the US was involved in a conflict, India retains the right not to extend these facilities. Is that right?
Whatever may be in the clause, but the letter and the spirit of the agreement, if you see, it basically indicates the direction which India is taking, and that direction is very clear. By offering a superpower, an empire, a military base on your own land, you are primarily indicating that I am with him. And your strategic autonomy is automatically reduced. The very fact that they are coming here, it is indicative that you are going to be present with them in their war and their other efforts. So, to say that it is only a peacetime arrangement and only for natural disasters, we are probably hoodwinking the people.
Quite disingenuous, yes. Okay, this is as far as the logistics services agreement is concerned. There are two other agreements which are in the pipeline, and it is expected that once the LSA is signed, perhaps the communications agreement, the SISMOA as it's called, is also likely to be signed, as well as the agreement on geospatial data, which means India's aeronautical, space and other data is now going to be open to the United States. What is involved in these two agreements, and what are likely to be the implications of those?
SISMOA, as it suggests, communications, interoperability and security memorandum of agreement, and the BECA of course is basic exchange and cooperation agreement for geospatial cooperation. Now, in this, as you yourself has said, that the data is very important. Military data is always in encrypted form.
That's right.
Military data is the most crucial in any war. Communications is the most crucial in any war. It's a bedrock of any war.
And especially in the modern times.
Especially in the modern times when the entire theater, which could be a joint theater in most of the cases now, would actually be dependent on the communication technologies where you are having a network centric war.
That's right.
Now, in that situation, especially when countries are really guarding their own data, for India to invite somebody and share its own data with them is something preposterous.
And I believe India would also be obliged to share their codes, the data codes, the encryption codes.
Yes, the entire encryption system would be shared in this particular process. And even if America was to share, let's assume that if America was to share their entire codes, we have nothing to do with it.
That's right.
You won't be able to use it.
We have no use of it. So, in that sense, what problems it will raise is about command and control. Once your communications are not in your hand in any for any military for that matter, it raises the question of command and control problems.
Yes.
Who will control the assets, the military assets that India has? How will they be controlled and how will they be deployed?
Right.
In an environment where you are having interoperability, in an environment where communication channels are open to the other power to communicate with your assets directly. So, the manpower as well as your hardware, military hardware, will now be under somebody else's command.
It has long been made out, particularly by the US, that they are hampered in transferring advanced or strategic military technologies with India because India has not signed these 3 agreements. Do you think that is part of the carrot which the US is dangling before India to tempt India to sign these agreements?
That's always been a part of the US strategy, to dangle that carrot, and that they've done after a very thorough study of Indian military mind, of Indian elite mind. In 2000, an American consultancy firm, Booz Allen, a few of their people were here in India to study the Indian military mind. What exactly are they looking for? And in that report, which was pretty finely made, what came out was that Indians are primarily, all Indian military officers feel that over a period of time they have been deprived of high technology. Now, somehow, because we went to procure some equipment from Soviet Union, therefore, we have not had the best of equipment available to us. So, that kind of a feeling of deprivation within the military elite as well as the political and the bureaucratic elite was tapped very well by the Americans. So, the Americans then dangle this carrot that if you sign this, we will bring the best for you. But however, the fact is that after so many years of their agreements with NATO countries also,
There's been no transfer of technology.
there has been no transfer of technology.
Right.
They don't share the best of their
There's
technologies.
been no manufacturing bases outside the United States.
Outside the United States, and that's one of the biggest cribs of the European Union country, of the NATO countries.
Okay. Finally, if India now, with the signing of these 3 agreements, is entering into what looks like a more formal military partnership with the United States, what are the implications of this formal military alliance? Particularly because, as you know, Secretary Ashton Carter's visit to India is going to be preceded by Admiral Harris's visit, and he's the head of the US Pacific Command, under which theater, from the US's strategic point of view, India comes. So is this US-India alliance, which is developing, essentially going to be China-centric? And if so, what is the wider implications of this for this region?
You know, wider implications, one we were talking about sovereignty, strategic autonomy. You know, another issue that one really needs to ponder over is, how is this strategic alliance, formalized strategic alliance with America, going to impact our civil military relations? How is it going to impact the unit cohesion within the armed forces? Now, these are two very important issues. Before we discuss China, I would just like to mention these two issues, because history suggests to us, wherever America has gone and developed strategic relations, you know, barring of course the NATO, which is a different case altogether, with other medium powers in other parts of the world, they have always treated military as a separate entity. Take the case of Pakistan, sure. Take in Philippines for that matter. So, that particular sense, how it is going to impact, is it going to increase our military's propensity to take larger role in foreign policy decision making? Is it going to increase our military's propensity to to interfere more in Indian politics? Because if we look at history, all the American allies in other countries have actually a very strong military, which is politically very strong. Yes.
And there is a greater extent of militarization of policy making among the American allies.
Another issue, if you see, is the privatization issue. Yes. When Americans talk of logistics, today American military logistics is all privatized. So, if they are to establish a base in India, all the logistic functions will not be delivered by the state militaries. So, Indians military for that matter will actually be dealing with the contractors. Now, will it lead to contractorization or mercenarization of the Indian armed forces is another issue.
Sure, at least cultural impacts on the Indian military.
Cultural impacts, we going back, I have studied, for my thesis basically, the presence of American military in India in 1940. During the Second World War, India was a military base of the Americans. There were around more than 2 lakh American GIs present in India, in Calcutta, Delhi. And since India was not a base from where combat was launched, it was primarily a base, a logistic base. The amount of indiscipline, the amount of criminal activity which the American soldiers indulged in was actually a pain in the neck for the Britishers. There are records available of how the Americans were involved in rape cases, in India I am talking about, and how they were involved in other petty crimes. That is another fact. If you see in Okinawa in Japan, sure. That is what people protest about. Yes. In South Korea, that is what people protest about. Sure. In Philippines, in Subic Bay and other places, that is why their base was removed, because people were protesting against the kind of atrocities they were given. Now, coming back to your question on China, that is the central part of the American game plan.
That's right, especially with the US pivot, as they call it, to Asia.
Asia. Everything is basically directed towards China. And this is probably for the second time that we will be getting entangled into an American game. This happened in 57. We think that during that particular period we were away from Americans. But if you actually take the case of Tibet, sure. in Dharamshala, we basically offered them a base to conduct their operations into Tibet. And this is now, very much released by the the CIA's role in Tibet and Indian collaboration with them on that particular issue is all documented by the Americans themselves now. As they say that they, as the time elapses, they continue to release these arrested histories. And they have documented it very well how, the entire, even the Pakistan land was used for Tibet operations. So, India was a strategic ally of Americans, and what it resulted in 62, we all know, without we gaining anything, we lost 3,000 soldiers, we had our economy in doldrums, because immediately after that you had a financial crisis in 66, you were under heavy debts. So, we probably not learning lessons from history. When there is no conflict, we want to create a conflict to appease whom? That is also a part of our elite strategy. The fetish for great power, quote unquote, is primarily what the Americans are tapping into. Now, India, China, if China has started thinking in terms of sending out its ship, it is only after they are one of the biggest economies of the world. They are a $10 trillion economy, and where do we stand? China is moving out of the purpose. We don't even have a purpose to move out.
Thank you. We are running out of time. I'm sure we could have continued the discussion longer, but I think we'll have other occasions to get together to discuss these and other issues. Thank you once again, Mr. Bhardwaj.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.